Today I'm down at a bird photography hide near Leeds, and in this video I'm going to give you some tips on photographing great spotted woodpeckers. So if you want to attract great spotted woodpeckers, then you need some kind of food source to bring them down. Now I think the fat ball mixture is probably the best. They absolutely love this, and rather than just put that out in bird feeders, which is going to look more unnatural in photos, what you can do is get yourself something more natural. So if you can get a log, a branch, an old stump for example, and then you can smear the fat ball mixture onto there, or alternatively you can even drill some holes and then you can stuff the food mixture into there. Now if you do this, one thing is you want to make sure that it's not showing in the picture. So if you can, you kind of want it to the side, but you want it just out of view. You don't want it showing up in the images. So what I often do is look from behind the perch towards the hide, and I can just see and try and make it so that the food is just out of sight. This means that you're going to get more natural looking pictures, and it also kind of represents similar foraging behaviour for the woodpecker to what it would do completely in the wild. Now the only problem with this is that when the woodpecker starts to feed, you can end up with food around the beak, so it doesn't look quite as good sometimes in the photo. So one way of getting around this is actually just to have a separate perch without any food. So you can have your main food source such as the bird feeder, and then just introduce another natural looking perch nearby, maybe 2 or 3 feet away. And what you'll often find, particularly woodpeckers, is that they'll often naturally go on there anyway. So if it's near to the food source, they'll often fly down, go on the perch first before feeding. And when they land on that perch, there's no food there, so everything's going to be nice and clean, no mess on the beak, and really natural looking pictures. And what I've done myself in the past with my own feeding stations is I've had a nice natural perch that I've chosen for photography, and I've probably drilled some holes in there or smeared the fat ball mixture on, and that's just to keep the woodpeckers coming and get used to that particular perch. And so I'll do that when I'm not there, but when I actually get into the hide for photography, I actually won't put any food on there. So because the woodpecker's used to it, they'll probably come down, go on that perch, but there's no food, so I get those nice clean images. Now, if you're not able to do that, then what I'd suggest is as soon as that woodpecker comes down, you just want to try and fire off some shots instantly. The first couple of seconds when the bird lands, it's not going to be feeding, everything's going to be nice and clean, and you're going to get the best pictures. And in terms of your perches, I do find that vertical ones, I think, tend to work the best for woodpeckers. They're naturally scaling the tree trunks and branches, so you often get them on the side. Vertical ones work really well, or maybe if you just find some kind of old stump. But I find horizontal ones, sometimes the woodpeckers can look a little bit awkward, particularly on thinner branches. Now in terms of camera settings, I generally use a fairly wide aperture. I'm on a 500mm lens today. I'm using f5 at the moment. That's going to really help to blur those backgrounds. Now when it comes to your shutter speed, I think sometimes if you can catch that woodpecker where it slows down just for a little bit longer, sometimes you can get away with maybe down to 1/200th of a second, for example, as long as you've got reasonable camera support. But I do find with those woodpeckers, they seem to move their heads quite a lot, I find, just generally, and obviously if they're feeding, if they're pecking away at a branch, for example. So I think you really want to try and keep your shutter speed up most of the time. Aim for about 1/1000th of a second, I would say, to be safe. Now what you can do, the opposite of that, if you wanted to actually blur that head movement, if you've got a woodpecker that's tapping onto the tree, you could actually use a slower shutter speed and try and deliberately blur that movement. So I think in the past I've tried down at about 1/100th of a second, and the idea is to get most of the bird nice and sharp, but just to get the head moving, just to show that movement. And something else with woodpeckers that I noticed is they seem to close their eyelids quite often, more than a lot of other birds. Maybe that's just the nature of how they feed, maybe it's for protection. So I quite often find it in pictures, and that just, you know, it doesn't look so good, you don't really want that. So again, a high shutter speed can be useful, but also just to keep taking more pictures. Now, when it comes to your exposure, the main thing you want to pay attention to is those whites. There is quite a lot of whites on these woodpeckers, both underneath and on the face and the wing patch as well. So ideally, what I'll be doing here is making sure that nothing is overexposed off the right hand side of my histogram. Now, I do tend to make use of highlight alert, so I have that set, which means that I can instantly see any areas of whites that are flashing, and I know that that's overexposed. So what I'll be aiming for here is to have a little bit of a gap on the right hand side, which is the brightest area of the image, just a bit of a gap there between that and the right hand side of the histogram. Now sometimes I might push it a little bit more to where the whites are is literally right up against the right hand side. If you shoot raw, then there's probably a bit more information there anyway. And what I do find with the Great Spotted Woodpeckers is that the area of the brightest whites tends to be around the face and the wing patch more than the underside. I've got a male now. I've got a male now on the perch on the right hand side feeding. So I took a couple of shots there, and at first they were definitely overexposed. So looking on the back of the screen, I can see those white areas flashing. So I'm shooting manually, so all I'm going to do is increase my shutter speed a little bit, just to darken it down. Now when it comes to your focusing, obviously it's going to vary a bit depending on what system you're using, but I do find here myself that the eye tracking tends to work fairly well with woodpeckers. If you don't have that, or sometimes situations where it just doesn't work, then I just suggest a single focus point, either single focus point or sometimes maybe the spot focus, and just try and get the focus point as accurate as you can on the head, or as close as you can to the eye. Now I definitely think composition is an interesting one with woodpeckers. Now if you're photographing the woodpecker on a tree trunk or a vertical branch, sometimes it might fit okay as a horizontal composition with the bird to one side, but a lot of the time the vertical compositions work well, I find. So don't be afraid to turn the camera vertically. Often if you've got that tree trunk, that vertical branch, it's already fitting into a vertical composition nicely. But there's other things you can do as well, kind of offsetting the woodpecker to one side to give it space, for example. That often can work really well if the woodpecker looks outward. So if it's on the side of the perch and it looks outward, if you give it space to look into. I would say I've spent a lot of time photographing these woodpeckers here in the UK, but I don't have too much experience with the other species. So the best images I've got of other woodpeckers have actually been out in Bulgaria, where I photographed green, Syrian and middle spotted. So I'm going to put some of those images up on the screen for you now. I do hope the tips in this video are useful, and if you'd like to use this hide yourself for small birds and Great Spotted Woodpecker, then click the link that's up on the screen. There's a brand new hide in now, so if you've been before, there's much more room either side of you and behind. Really, really spacious hide. Check it out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.